Rasta, the dreadlock adjacent, Falasha, the Ma'at, the Olmec, the Maya, the Inca, Taino, the Moorish Duende, Contata, Belize, No Basta, Grenada, Jamaica. Que rico like otros ríos más grande. Outside, no pesticides before pale feet touch the landscape of the original inhabitants tried to escape. It's basic, pre-slave shit. Their fictions, created, ageless. Dogon mask our faces. I mastered ancestry and came out the best me. When clock strikes midnight, in St. Croix rock mics, there's kings and niggas. They say not to say that. Unchained from black with that slang rap and blaze cats with plain facts and blasted Babylon when we press wax, we're gifted. Burning frankincense, incense. The priest of the Most High, Tonatsin, my flag fly, Azteca Selassie, Shango Elegba. Original religion, conviction, Yoruba, Yeshua, through mixed board computer with the least scratch, the guru. Afrofuturism and philosophy of religion. Thank y'all for coming. Appreciate it. So I had the privilege of a bunch of really cool students who I taught a class on, and I thought, these papers are so dope, let's make a book out of it. And sometimes I'll start with saying, sometimes academic publishers don't like that shit. They're like, well, why don't people have degrees and stuff like that? And I said, that's cool, but why do they have to? So I want to thank Wittgenstein Publishers for embracing the vision and doing this, because many publishers wouldn't. So I'm going to throw out a few terms that the concepts of the text revolve around. Hello. And then I'm going to get into the intro of the text. And then I'm going to read one essay of the text, and then we're going to talk. Because I'd rather we have a conversation. Cool? The first term, philosophy. And philosophy means various things to various people, as my colleague Lisa Helke can tell you. The way I use the word philosophy is anything that causes us to reimagine what it means to live in the world. Whether that's sweeping the floor, whether that's cooking, whether it's reading, sometimes it's thinking. But I've been asking my students, and I think, Jay, I asked our class this question. I said, well, why does philosophy always have to be about thinking, first off? So the way I view philosophy is anything that causes us to reimagine what it means to live in the world, whatever that may be. First term, throw it out there. Don't forget it. The second term, philosophy of religion. How does one grapple with what it means to talk about ultimate meaning? Till it talks about religion being that which is most important, that which concerns humanity most ultimately. How does one interrogate that? That part might be on the thinking side, but it also may be on the aesthetic side. Philosophy of religion. Third, African philosophy. There's several types of African philosophies. I mean, what I mean by that is the discipline that emerged in the early 20th century around these questions of what it means to do African philosophy and is African philosophy possible. Thinkers such as John Mbiti, Jennifer Lisa Vest, Pauline Ntunji. We did a whole scope of these people through our courses, and we asked questions about their writings and about how their writings impact art, culture, food, everything. And the last topic, or the last idea, is something I call aesthetic religion, which, just to be short, because I talk about this in the intro, aesthetic religion for me is any work of art or school of aesthetic thought that causes us to reimagine the world itself. Whether it's painting, whether it's music, whether it's the process by which one does art, what orients you to the world, and how does that orientation make the world look different? In the same way that one may say, well, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Santeria makes the world look different. How does art make the world look different? And how do people live in the world and find art the most central form of meaning? So that's very important. Cool?
to read the intro. So just with those terms in mind, kind of follow me a little bit. Intro. Toward Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist Philosophies of Religion. This truly was an experiment that I semi-expected to go nowhere. But I should have hoped for more. It's much more than I could have ever expected, is what I got. During the school semester of 2018-2019, I was fortunate to gain a visiting professorship at Pomona College in the area of Africana Studies in religion/Africana philosophy of religion. As I was reading the job call, I was thrown off, as well as pleasantly surprised. Maybe I was naive. Actually, I wasn't, kinda. But I didn't know there was such thing as Africana philosophy of religion. Such phraseology is nothing the Academy has either espoused or even made a serious live option in the academic study of religion or philosophy. In many instances, for the philosophy of religion, as it is taught in colleges and universities in the United States and globally, derives its foci from questions that arise from Western theisms. Questions that quite often are incapable of encompassing the complexities and multiplicities found in traditions that share few or no similarities with Western theisms. Shaped from, even though they may take quasi-religious and secular forms, Judeo-Christian practices and understandings. Due to the structure of Enlightenment-derived philosophies of religion in the vein of Kant, Schelling, Hegel, Schleiermacher, which in many instances only consider as a footnote to the reflections on the same or similar questions of figures from India, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, Mexico, and more, are these frameworks capable of analyzing in ways that the ways in which religious beliefs is both defined and at work in Rastafari, the Moorish Science Temple of America, Afrofuturist art, Santeria, and hip-hop? If the answer to these questions is no, then how do we adequately discuss, account for, / critically engage the religiosity of these life-transformative methods of existence in the world of philosophy, religion, sort of mindset, is that even possible? I know that my before is behind, judged off of my dad's Belizean Creole. I used the beginning as a semi-conclusion, but all will come together shortly. And I better hurry. It's an intro, and I don't have much time. The department at Pomona graciously allowed me to assemble my own curriculum for my visiting year, and that was fun. I used this opportunity to approach within the setting of the classroom some far-reaching combinations of ideas I'd wanted to explore on fertile grounds. Some of the courses' titles were Hip-Hop as an Afrodiasporic Religious Practice, Aesthetic Religious Atheism of the Darker Hues, and Electronic Music and Meaning. During the fall semester, I taught the class that bears the name of this book, Toward Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist Philosophies of Religion, in which the students and I studied the discipline of philosophy of religion alongside African philosophies and Afrofuturist works. What emerged from this was a remarkably novel semester-long discussion on the richness of Afrodiasporic philosophical and Afrofuturist materials, and the communities that develop from them as religious and religions. The class of 13 students began with a reworking definition of religion for some of us. We chose not to adopt a more narrow understanding that in some sense includes belief in literally transcendent deities and mandates of conduct which emerge in the empirical world from super-rational positions. Rather, we chose to take the approach of sociology of religion, lived experience, and history, referring to religion from the original religio to blind as anything which provides meaning to an individual group or group of people, thus sustaining the individual or community through a binding to a way of life they commit to which makes sense of the world. For the purposes of this class, religion is a decision to anchor oneself to an ideology amidst a world where meaning itself is arbitrary. It is literally the human, very emphasized the human, making a way out of no way, as process philosopher Monica Coleman would say. The first few days with this vibrant, scholarly, and plain fun group of students were a shift of perspective for many of them. Some of them remarked that their views of religion before these days only related to Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or other belief systems commonly thought of as religious. Now the playing field for exploration was wide open. From this unstable foundation, I'm always skeptical when a foundation is too secure, we could look at Afrodiasporic philosophy and Afrofuturism as religious and religions, and ask if philosophy of religion, as it had stood historically in the Western canon, could engage the religiosity of the class, even at this early stage, it was sure it possessed. With such an understanding of religion, which is of course not new, but maybe our application of it is somewhat novel, I begin to invite the students to consider aesthetic and cultural productions of the Afro-diaspora, not commonly associated with the world religions, as religions, not in need of any sort of traditionally generally accepted religion to give them any religiosity. In discussions on religion and the arts, the tendency in many instances seems to be to try to find traces of an accepted world religion in a work of art, as opposed to acknowledging the work of art as religious on its own, whether it contains an idea of deities or not. The corpus of the work of Monica R. Miller has cautioned us against such a starting point, suggesting that to begin searching for recognizable elements of what many call religion by default is to ignore the religiosity that the works of art and aesthetic schools of thought possess in themselves. Religion comes from somewhere very tangible in the world. And insofar as Afro-diasporic works of art, such as the Afrofuturist poetry and mixed media of Chicago's Krista Franklin, the global subversive hip-hop philosophies articulated and enacted by the Wu-Tang Clan, Wu-Tang Forever, make sure you get those records, and the science fiction of Octavia Butler. Imagine and invite us into imagining new ways to exist in the world, something essential for elongated survival. They are participating and in the same strand of the creation of meaning that we sometimes forget is occurring in the world religions, some view as being sacred and otherworldly. Grounding my own work in my recently released book on underground rap and process philosophy and process theology, entitled Underground Rap as Religion, a theoretic examination of a process aesthetic religion, is a term I use, aesthetic religion. Aesthetic religion asserts that works of art and schools of aesthetic thought provide the adherent similar types of meaning as world religions provide to those who follow them. This brings us to a serious dilemma, one we were wrestling with the whole class period. In the philosophy of religion, a discipline that gains its name from the latent post-Enlightenment discussions of continental thinkers such as Hegel, Kant, Spinoza, Hume, Schelling, Kierkegaard, and even Nietzsche, address the kind of belief systems that appear in the type of aesthetic religions that we discussed. This question goes beyond the initial query of discerning the adequacy of philosophy of religion to address the religiosity of aesthetic religions. Here we're asking a question about the ability of Western philosophy of religion approach to adequately reverence some aesthetic religions. What the hell would Kant really do with the serious assertion that Afro-diasporic and Afrofuturist art is a religion, especially when he does not allow for Afro-diasporic people to be considered as equal to Europeans on the human scale, let alone hold any systems of aesthetic and cultural productions created by them to anchor their worlds as worthy of the designation of religion. The rituals of Obeah, the ring shout of the Afro-diasporic U.S. Church, conjured from the past during chattel slavery, the rhythms and souls of salsa, the addictive kick snare of 90s boom bap, all things that have liberated the diaspora and the world are outside of the scope of the world religions and of the word religion in philosophy of religion, as shaped by the Western philosophical world. Monica R. Miller and Christopher M. Driscoll hold that, I quote, another/and other orientation could suggest black religion as an oxymoron, in that religion, the totem of the odd confederation of tribes known as white Europeans, and the history of religions and its comparative approach is the making of white European identity through the ongoing question of the rest of the world's similarities to white European identity. Yet these possibilities are shaped by the concern over the object of religion, not over the distance-making via method. The students, while finding great use for many of the categories utilized in philosophy of religion, such as questions around the existence of God, miracles, religious pluralism, the problem of evil, gendered ideas of the divine, and other subjects/questions seem to agree with Driscoll and Miller. The thing we call philosophy of religion not only intentionally overlooks, but also makes invisible the very means of existing in the world that the diaspora has thrived off of, pre- and post-colonization. Its formulations of questions asked centuries before the advent of the Enlightenment are hierarchical, racist, classist, and elitist. The aim of philosophy of religion, the investigation of the nature of religious belief, is in itself a worthy pursuit. But the students were unanimous in asserting that the things now included in our definition of religion, which was damn near everything, were beyond the scope of philosophy of religion as it stands. Maybe we could forge toward new ways to seriously investigate the inner workings of these religious traditions through language, strategies, and thinking that wouldn't perform reductionist violence on their richness. So just to pause, if someone were to tell me that record digging was not a religion, I would have my students jump in without me telling them. Well, this is where meaning is made. So how is it not a religion? And how should it not be seen as such? In an attempt to approach philosophy of religion from the concerns of the Afrodiaspora, I saw a need to serve as a tour guide through the discipline of what has been called African philosophy. My personal hunch was that African philosophy, especially negritude, work of Theophilus Beaucaire, John Mbiti, Jennifer Vest, Bell Hooks, and other profound thinkers are philosophers of religion themselves, whether or not their writing engages explicit and or literal notions of God or whether it concerns other philosophy of religion. According to the sociological/constructive definition of religion the class agreed upon, given the fact that the corpus of African philosophy, from text to oral tradition to daily practices, compilation of strategies to live and flourish in the world in the most dynamic sense and intense ways possible, what I would similarly call centers of significance in aesthetic religion, it has a religiosity that is both religious and religions. African philosophy is a natural organization of the world that perpetually ingresses and redistributes to a context that which is most important to it. And similar to Alfred North Whitehead's notion of God in process and reality, or maybe more appropriately, Sanaa Lathan's sentence description of hip-hop in Brown Sugar. Because I argue that in Brown Sugar, Sanaa Lathan's description of hip-hop is God. Guided by the thought of philosopher Barry Howland, we ask questions around when African philosophy began. Is there something intrinsic, non-negotiable, and essentially African about African philosophy, ethno-philosophy? Paul Ntunji. Was there a time in which African philosophy did not exist and had to be brought into existence? Professional philosophy. Or whether or not African philosophy is solely derived from an assumption about the people who may be articulating or practicing the thought/ways of life in Tim Peller's Bantu philosophy. Or from the perpetually changing existential situation from which the thought emerges. Focus on the hermeneutical approach that many thinkers who identify African philosophers find valuable in Gadamer, Heidegger, Husserl, and Sartre. In this mode, we begin to ask contextual questions around the connections between 20th century African philosophy and meaning-making in the present-day U.S., Puerto Rico, and found more satisfying methods of engaging these religious questions here than through Western philosophy of religion. The class owes a great deal to Jennifer Vest, who in the article, The Promise of Caribbean Philosophy, provides a way for non-Western philosophical thinkers to dialogue amongst themselves, without the philosophical traditions of Britain, France, Spain, Germany, among others, serving as both mediator and measuring stick of what is proper philosophical dialogue. The method encourages dialogue amidst non-Western thinkers without the expectation of convincing someone with a divergent view of your own. Rather, through intense discussion, parties are forced to examine problematic points in their own positions while finding better ways of implementing plausible ones. I feel that this class was one that decentered Europe as the pinnacle of philosophical discourse, with most of the conversations about philosophy revolving around rappers, poets, singers, and film directors, who identified as being part of the African diaspora. Instead of attempting to synthesize the discussions around Western notions found in philosophy of religion, we did our own thing, basing questions and answers, many times peripherally, about the problem of evil, the existence of God, religious language, and religious pluralism, or the lack thereof, on the cultural norms and context and contextual concerns that we brought to the class via our own flesh. There were many times when these questions didn't even come up. The questions of philosophy of religion, the ones that we're told we have to ask, they didn't even come up. If Kendrick Lamar or Rhapsody are deities, the conversation about whether or not they exist may be unnecessary, unless we're doing some really, really critical epistemology. So the room doesn't exist, so they don't. We ain't doing that. So if they're deities, that conversation is unnecessary. What effects do these deities and some type of belief in them have on the world might be a more adequate question, but a James type analysis and a writer's religious experience or Locke's sociology of religion may fail at addressing the effects of religious belief in relation to human figures, not expressly connected to a confessional religion, a realm in which belief takes on a different form than it does in hip hop. I could go on. The point is that Vest's take on Caribbean philosophy opened up a conversational format for me to employ to ensure that European categories and voices did not serve as the main interlocutors of which we would move toward Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist philosophies of religion. One of the most important and most exciting parts of the class is its Afrofuturist dimension. My hire at Pomona came after the end of 2018, spring semester, a point where most students had already registered for classes. So I was SOL. Nobody's registered for the class, what's happening? Mid-August, Aaron Runyon, then the department chair of religious studies, informed me that toward Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist philosophies of religion had quite a small number of students enrolled, and that it might need to be canceled. So I went into self-promotional hip-hop MC mode, made flyers, hit the pavement, and the course enrolled within 2 days, thanks to what I learned in the Chicago hip-hop scene. My work in the Chicago like Tomorrow Kings has been described by many, including esteemed Afrofuturist Christopher Franklin, as a type of Afrofuturism. And I think a good amount of my work and my solo releases as Gill had 7, between 03 and 09, flow on the same river. What is Afrofuturism? Good question. I'm glad you asked. There are several definitions that have been attached to it, coming from Mark Derry, Alondra Nelson, Yatasha Womack, who actually writes the foreword in this book, thanks to Yatasha Womack, and other important thinkers. Drawing from all of these definitions, the class seemed to reside within the region of describing Afrofuturism as thinking about the possibilities of identities of the Afrodiasporic self in ways that not only disregard, but also deconstruct and defy the methods in which Afrodiasporic people had been forced to by the aftershocks of white supremacy to identify. Many Afrofuturist science fiction writers seem to suggest that Afrodiasporic people will only be free in a future where the systemic structures of oppression no longer exist, such as race, such as class, such as binaries. The work of Octavia Butler, Erykah Badu, Sun Ra, Jimi Hendrix, and others were points of encounter with Afrofuturist ways of thinking to challenge us to reimagine gender, race, class, sexual orientation, ableism, nationalism, and other facets of identity politics building through our own Afrofuturist religious lenses. Throughout the semester, we stuck close to Ytasha Womack Afrofuturism, the world of Black sci-fi and fantasy culture, as we studied Afrofuturism, Afrofuturist ways of becoming, as religious and religions, and did meta work, forging possible, flexible, and unstable categories that an Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist philosophy of religion might use to examine belief at such unique levels. So let's wrap it up, and let's talk, to use one of my favorite rapper, at least at one time, Elzai's song title. So this conclusion of wonderful papers is in many ways a shot in the dark, which will prove most successful if its aim is not reached. We attempt to move seriously toward possible Afrodiasporic and Afrofuturist philosophies of religion in the close of the class, and the final assignment was to, number one, discuss what ingredients would be essential to an Afrodiasporic philosophy of religion. Two, identify what sort of categories, if any, should be designed to group the phenomena and ways of thought life we encountered. I'm really big into examining and questioning categories, the ways in which we shape the world. Why do we have to shape the world? As Jay knows, Jay is probably tired of me saying that too much. Thanks for bearing with me. Three, how they would propose an Afrodiasporic or Afrofuturist philosophy of religion that would serve the traditions in question more efficiently than the methods historically used by philosophers of religion for very different data. I'm not sure if we achieved that at all. However, through vibrant, tenuous, and difficult discussions, writing, listening, clowning, we were very loud in that class. Shout to Vicky, who was next to recording the program, who didn't bother us and we were loud. We had an openness to seriously interrogate and reimagine the categories of philosophy of religion, African philosophy, and Afrofuturism. We give you these offerings to play through. Utter gratitude goes to Madison Beer Hemingway at Pitzer College, Dre Denson at Pomona College, Nathan Han at Pomona, Eliza Jabarbe at Pomona, Kalanzi Kajubi at Pitzer College, Justin Lennox at Pomona, Benjamin Miller at Pitzer College, Rachel Murdoch at Pomona College, Magali at Pomona College, Olu at Pomona College, Desiree and Daniel Savvy, all at Pomona. All of you made this experience indelible, and I hope this text, your text, their text, generates for the reader the dynamic energy we conjured from the ancestors in our modern Hush Harbor meetings, where we thought through ancient sorcery, syncretized philosophy of religion, African philosophy, and Afrofuturism. And that's the intro. Let's talk. You know what I want to do actually before I do that? I'm talking about aesthetic religion. This notion of finding ultimate meaning through a work of art or through a school of aesthetic thought. Here's my experience with that. Then I promise I'm gonna shut up and then we can talk. This is from my first book, Underground Rap as Religion. This one here. Oops. It was almost 20 years ago. That space was amazing. I understood it before, but it really became crystal unclear that day at Northeastern University. My friend Rusty parked the car and we raced out of it as the sounds of kicks and snares and bass contrasted and the speakers were heard in the distance. They lured us. Where the hell was it coming from? We kept walking down the empty halls of the university and seemed to travel farther from the sonic utopia each step. Damn, where is it? We tossed and turned down this floor and that floor until we finally hit it. There was only 200 feet between us and the auditorium where life was born again. I ran to the door, drunk in the sounds of what could be no-sense staccato vocals smashed on top of each other. My heart beat to overloading capacity as I opened the door. There it was. There I was. I was home, but I'd never been there before like this. The room was packed. In its middle were two circles of physical artists spinning on the floor as the rhythms inspired them to create holograms for us all to walk through. In the corner, by the stage, were pen players, scribbling hard to decipher symbols on blank white sheets. It looked like the paradise you might see if you understood what the colored hieroglyphs outside of your train really were not. On the stage was a humanoid, at least he may have been, turning records into tilt-a-whirls, defying centrifugal force in ways that sounded like music. All around the room were a collection of humans talking on beat off the top of their head. Someone told me they were ciphering. I started doing it too. What was that? It was hip hop. It was the next universe, a world within a world. It is the epitome of authenticity, maintenance of multiplicity. We all were one, yet many. Whitehead. There was no race there. We took spaceships beyond that. In it, I was saved. How dare I call it my mom's Jesus? It was much better. This is what Tunnel Rats meant when they sung the chorus. I'm talking about a place called hip hop. Whatever happened to that place called hip hop? I've never seen you in that place called hip hop. Not you. So the lies need to speak. So the lies that you speak need to stop. I went there and never left. That to me is aesthetic religion. Thanks. So, any thoughts? Please, Lisa.
I'm sorry.
No.
So, I'm adopting your definition of philosophy. That's really compelling. And I'm compelled by your definition of religion. What am I missing by choosing not to use that category?
You're not necessarily missing anything, because I don't think the category is necessary for everyone. You know, I will say that when I utilize the term, it really encompasses what some people would call atheism, or what some people would call regular meaning making.
Yeah.
So, but, and I think KRS-One does this really well in his book, The Gospel of Hip Hop. I think there's something that happens in these traditions, in aesthetic traditions, that sort of is hard to define with linear logical language, and something that kind of escapes what we can say. And so I think for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, the notion of religion is a good way to talk about it. Because for me, and I was tempted when I wrote the first book, I was like, okay, I could do a sociological analysis and just say this is just flat. This is simply, well, it seems to be something more than what it is, but it's really not. In the way I could reduce a world religion, say this is just the byproduct of history, of culture, of different ways of thinking. But then there's something about it in what I just read that I can't reduce to that. So for me, and I would say, well, this is how I think the art of religion is very useful. Because to me, it's simply aesthetics. You know, religion is a certain type of aesthetic about the world. Some people call it theopoetics. You know, theopoetics indicates this notion of, well, the container of a thing changes it. And some people would say, well, theopoetics is creating God. And so, for me, things like this, it's very interesting when you create ideas of God around them and kind of build a mythology. Because there are things that KRS says about hip hop that are very mythological, like probably didn't happen that way. But there's something about telling the story that way. So at least for some people, it's very valuable. Ideas, questions, concerns. Please, hey.
Hey, the word aesthetics, does that imply something visual only?
No,
Okay.
no. For me, no. For me, it's really about the process of creativity, whatever that looks like. You know, I would even describe aesthetics for me as like a poesis, meaning in the Greek sense. Well, around all types of creation, not necessarily poetry, but the creation, the art of creation. I would say, well, to act in the world is creation. So I would say, for me, it's all aesthetics.
So aesthetics is how you move through the world?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
got it.
Yeah, at least my definition. Yeah,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
folks would beef with me, but yeah, you know. I mean, the students really did some amazing work in this book. Like, it was when I saw the paper, I said, these have to see the light of day. I mean, there's papers on Black trans lives and whether or not in Black theology there's a win. There's papers on Nietzsche and Afrofuturism. There's papers on Janelle Monáe, Erykah Badu. There's a paper on Russian rap and philosophy of religion. Really, really, they just did some amazing stuff. I mean, it's like I said, I just wrote the intro. I just got to be on the sidelines while they make brilliance. So I'd love for you to take this home with you and jump into it.
I will keep up taking up room, so please others should push me out of the way. Was there anything that you decided wasn't religion? I mean, you said sort of flippantly at one point, like it was pretty much everything, but were there things that you said, no, actually there is a, maybe not a hard edge, but a mushy edge, where over there it's no longer religion? I don't know, Tupperware containers, I don't know.
Yeah. I play with that sometimes too, because Tupperware container, right. It's not like a brick wall. It's like a nerve border between the two. Yeah. So, and maybe Jay, you've heard me say this before in class, where I say it was everything you wanted to be flippantly. Then I preface it by saying, well, is it? And I ask the question, is it anything you want it to be, insofar as it provides meaning, provides a way to orient oneself in the world? Because I could say, sweeping the floor is religion all day. But could I say that if it doesn't cause one to reimagine what it means to live in the world? So I would say if there's a mushy edge, it's probably that for me. And I sort of always pose it as a question, because I think about this a whole lot in terms of how this concept of religion we think about now is very new. It doesn't really show up until like the Enlightenment period. Why does it show up? As a way to differentiate the civilized from the savage. So then we start using this term religion to include things that Kant, Hegel, or Schleiermacher, or other people may say, okay, well that deserves to be called religion. But we're not talking about animism. We're not talking about Buddhism. We're not talking about Hinduism. Sometimes we do, but the term was utilized and is probably in that way. And the meaning we usually use it for now is probably under 500 years old. So, yeah.
How does the word transcendence figure into what you're talking about?
That's a great question. Like and I love the word transcendence because, I mean, I'm reminded of Jerome Stone's book, A Naturalist's Vision of Transcendence. So, for me, I'm a big drum and bass head. Like, I like going to drum and bass shows. And in those experiences, when the DJ just hits those 174 BPM rhythms, I go somewhere. And I'm gone. And it's like, wow. I begin to see the world in different ways. Now, I don't necessarily think that's anything more than the natural world. But I'm transcending something. So for me, transcendence has a very natural dysfunction. And that, but at the same time, to go back to Lisa's question about borders, my mom has a very different notion of transcendence. For her, there is a literal deity who is somewhere. So I don't want to leave her out either. So, exactly. Exactly. So I think the way I look at transcendence is, well, there's something that takes us beyond whatever we are in, whatever that is. And several people, and like this is I just read, that was transcendence. When I go into this place and I see all the elements of hip hop just hit me, that's transcendent. I'm gone, you know. And when my mother goes to church and has visions, that's transcendence, you know. So it does have a role. And this is kind of why I like to use the word religion, you know, because there's something there, I think, that's happening that I can't ascertain. I can't utilize as logical language to get at. So yeah, very, very, very much. And there's some people who are religious and who try to take that out of it. And for me, that's just, I don't do that. My personal thing, yeah.
So thinking along those lines, it's very personal, it's very individual, transformation and transcendence can be different.
Right.
So where's the universal in that? Is there a universal that you see layering onto that or part of that? Or is it just a universal human condition that we each find our own? So what do you think about that?
See, I think that's interesting. And I would probably say that it's more the social condition. That, because some people would even describe in sociology of religion, would say, well, religion is the predisposition of humanity to search for meaning. And I think what happens in these individual situations where this is happening, that may be individual, but it seems as if many humans have that. Now, I can't say for sure. I don't know anything for sure, but it seems as if that may be true. You know?
So the experience of transformation is probably universal. It's just
It could mean different.
it's multiple.
Right.
Multiplicity of experience.
But to even go back to drum and bass, A and I were at the Odessa show last Tuesday? Yeah, man, time flies. Yeah, it's like in electronic music cultures, there is this individual experience that happens when you're with people. But what's happening is both individual and collective. And the transcendence in some ways may depend on you being around people. I don't know. Because if you put that record on in your house and no one's there, it might be a different experience as opposed to you having an individual experience around people. I don't know.
Yeah, I sing in a choir, and COVID, it happens to be in a super progressive church choir, and COVID, I felt so much grief about not being able to sing with other people. And I could sing alone, I could sing in my car, I could sing with YouTube or whatever. But it wasn't as meaningful.
Right.
And it certainly wasn't as transformative or, I don't even know if I would say religious, it certainly wasn't as spiritually profound doing that alone. It was still meaningful, but doing it with other people was, I don't want to say it was necessary, but it was so important.
Right.
And it was such a loss not to be able to do that. Not only was it, it was deadly.
Yeah.
And how often is it something that we love to do is deadly?
Right. 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 No, I think that's actually a great example of this. Yeah. There is totally something different than Zooming this whole thing. Than being and I think that philosophy of religion as a discipline, at least as is the way it's been taught in the academies since it's been codified as such, it
doesn't account for that. It doesn't really give us any mechanism to deal with that. You know, some people might, but it's really difficult to engage these experiences. You know, because they may not be asking the question that philosophers and tells us to ask. They may not be asking questions at all. They may just be bursts of energy.
This isn't really a question, it's more me processing out loud as I do in like class and stuff. But but
That's why we love you.
But this reminds me of, I think I told you like, oh, I'm really burnt out of religion and like whatever, and this is when you proposed the idea that quilting was a religion. I think I looked at you and was like, what the hell are you talking about? And I left that conversation still confused. I think this cleared some of those things up for me, and it just makes me really excited because like specifically just like the collection of like people at the Gustavus philosophy department, it just, I love the idea, like I would not fit in at a lot of philosophy departments because I hate the idea of like, you know, when we're reading all these modern philosophers, like thinking like it has to be, we have to put a nail in this and we have to like hammer it in, it has to be this thing. And I just love all of the opportunities I've had for someone to be like, that definition, let's blow it up. Let's set dynamite to it and just say like, it can be more than this, it can be, and I love just like the inclusiveness of more things, because to say the thing that I find meaningful is more important than yours because it fits in this specific box, it feels wrong, you know, and to open it up and include more. I think I just like that. I like when we take definitions and we include more, and I think it's a little different than philosophy has traditionally been in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really pleased with what we've been able to do at Gustavus, you know, and I mean, I'm really glad to be a part of it now, because this is, you go to many departments, you're not going to see that. You're not going to, like, there will certainly be a pushback. But yeah, I like what you said about blowing up that, because this is really what I think that this is a part of, you know, because how Whitehead says in Process and Reality, he says that religious worship, and I'm paraphrasing, he says that religious worship is necessary to the idea of God because sometimes we think of it as such. But the idea of God doesn't presuppose religious worship. That idea or those ideas, because for Whitehead, creativity is this ultimate force in the universe, the many becoming one. Whitehead says, well, if you were to conceptualize, if you were to personify this act of the many becoming one, you would get something like God. And for Whitehead, God just really means, just put it simply, we were talking about this earlier, Andrew, God is simply infinite possibility. So that in itself is kind of, it destroys many perceptions of what that term could indicate. And then for Whitehead, it's also, well, God is the world, God is beyond the world, God is in some ways the function of the world reflecting upon itself. That's not an entity, it's a function. So God, for Whitehead in many ways, is humanity self-checking itself. It's that function in which, so yeah, but again, my mother's like, that ain't God, John. Stop, that ain't God. but yeah, I mean, we blow up these definitions because we see, or these in turn, because we see something valuable in them, and we see them being used for other things when we've been told they can be used for. Yeah.
So would you say that's more of thinking in terms of process rather than categorization? So, yeah, the Western need to pin it down is all rooted in categories.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is a process that forces us to live with ambiguity and change.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what I'm hearing?
In many ways, yeah. In many ways, I'm skeptical about absolutes. Yeah. Because, and I think this is what Afrofuturism points us to. Afrofuturism really asks us to reimagine the Afrodiasporic self outside of categories, but not that. And categories don't mean we give up distinctions. It means we challenge certain types of distinctions.
Ytasha Womack talks about race as a technology that was created about 500 years ago, 550 years ago during the transatlantic slave trade. It's created as a distinction, a type of difference. But this mode of thinking is not saying that difference is bad. It's saying, well, difference is more appreciated when it's not in these categories. This is what Erykah Badu does. This is what Janelle does. This is what Kendrick Lamar does. This is what they talk about in this text about. This is why this is important for a discussion about philosophy of religion. The interrogation into what religion is. Yeah. Andrew, I think I saw you.
I got 10,000 questions right now. I guess you said God is sort of infinite possibility.
Right.
And
For Whitehead, yeah.
Yeah, and I like that. And I was just thinking about how love is, in my mind, I think maybe I'm quoting Bell Hooks. The love is concern for helping another person reach, have spiritual growth.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But if, which I agree with that. I think when we think of God as being possibility as opposed to like a narrowing or confining or conforming to, right? I think a lot of times religion says you have to conform to this social standard,
Right.
of gender or, for example. But instead that in love we can help people escape these
Right.
social categories and become something more authentic.
Yeah, because I think you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, Hook's essay, "Love is the Practice of Freedom." I think
I'm not sure.
I think it's in that one. Yeah. But it's this in.
I think I'm quoting all about love, but that.
True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. There's something powerful about that, though. This response of love as this challenging of categories themselves, and what they can be. Because we're actually talking about this right now. I'm teaching race and sexuality. We're talking about this whole thing, and you know what? For the first 4 belt, like we ain't gonna read nothing. Just like we just gonna watch Netflix. So I assigned them. We did the same thing in our class.
For like a month.
I'm like, reading, what's that? Sorry, Majors and Quinn, I'm not dissing. I love you. Yeah. So right now we're watching. We watched Jenny in Georgia, which is a Netflix series about a girl who identifies as biracial and the issues that she's going through being in a school where she just can't figure out what's what. Her mother is going through some issues, and it's really interesting. And then we're looking at another show, Partner Track, which is about a woman who is a Korean American who's looking for a partner, who's actually going up for partner, and all the challenges she goes through with that. So I'm like, look, let's draw out all the categories that these shows show. Let's draw them on the board. Let's show how they intersect, and let's figure out what the hell is going on, and ask ourselves, number one, do these categories have to exist? Number two, who determines the categories? And number three, can liberation ever come under those categories? So we just, but I think we're kind of going to what you're saying, Andrew, and looking at what would it mean to imagine a world outside of those.
Yeah.
I'm going to really push back. I don't think categories are the problem. I think substance ontology is the problem. I think it's really attaching categories to substances that seem to be fixed and immovable that is the problem. I think categories are incredibly useful for helping us to understand ourselves in relation to others. But if you attach them, as you do, to a process ontology or to a relational ontology, it feels to me that they enable us to think. But it really is, if we think about categories as, like Plato or Aristotle, it's like this substance has these qualities. Then they get reified. But I think categories are like exciting and vibrant. And I mean, think of all the categories you used in describing those two old person here, television shows.
Are we both on ABC or something? Channel 7.
Channel 9?
Yeah.
6 o'clock on Sundays.
No, that's actually well taken, Lisa. That's well taken. And see, I'm not necessarily against these types of categories for sure, because I do believe that there is some sort of conceptual unity, and I am into I'm into fluidity, and I think that's a category in itself. But and this is something that Vest brings up in her book Philosophy, or actually in Philosophy of the Mixed Race Experience. She's arguing that, well, the category of mixed race for her, number one, it shows you that race is logically inconsistent. And number two, it challenges us to reimagine. So that category for her has to exist. So yeah, I think that that's important. And when I say difference, I'm talking about categories. When I say the difference must be preserved, I'm talking about categories. But the types of categories we've held on to, I think, are very seriously troubling.
Yeah, I can get something like that.
Makes me think about Latour and his idea that we are always rooted exactly where we are, and the only thing we can see is where we are. And so the question is, who's making the categories? It's all the categorization itself is very subjective in
Right.
that sense.
Right.
And historically, we've been taught to think that that's a problem, whereas I think what I'm saying is that's the possibility.
Because I think the middle ground may be who's making the categories, and and if the categories are made in community, that may be a different situation.
Or if we start from the understanding that I'm not trying to describe the way things are, but rather, this is what it looks like from here.
Right.
You know, then suddenly a category becomes an opportunity for you to say, gosh, that must be weird.
Right.
Or, oh, how interesting.
Right.
Or, I don't think I want to stand where you're standing.
Right. Yeah. I'm not feeling that. Right. Exactly. But yeah, and see, I think that becomes the question. And Ann Cudd's book, Analyzing Oppression, I think it makes me think of that. You know, where she's arguing, well, some categories by nature are oppressive, so should they be used? And I was very moved by what she presented in that book. You know, because it's like, you know, if an oppressive regime is making the category, that may be some issues. If we in this room are maybe growing into them, that may be different. You know, because I think about it too in terms of like race versus ethnicity and nationality. Because I kind of look at race as something what society told you are, based on fabricated biological evidence, which doesn't necessarily have to exist, as we know. But ethnicity being how people grow and how people come together, which could be a category as well. You know, that's a category in a sense, but it has its problems. But the problems it has are not the problems of categories that were determined by domination.
Well, and is it just, I was thinking about your comment about fluidity, and of course, that is a category. Is it just part of the human condition that we want, whether they're rigid categories or more fluid categories, that helps us make sense of the world, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's right. I think we do. I think we do, and I think the issue many times is how rigid and I think we keep saying how rigid the categories are.
Yeah.
You know,
And who makes them?
Who makes them? Yeah. Because I mean it's very hard not to make concept. That goes back to human. You know that we experience the world through the impressions make ideas, those recreate, and then we keep going. So you know it's difficult not to live like that. But the types of differences that we perpetuate, I think is very detrimental in many instances.
One more question?
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry.
Just Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor," or just "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Like poor is like a category that was oppressive, but Jesus flips it.
Right.
Now it's a blessing. Now it's a possibility.
Right. Right. Yeah.
The meek shall inherit.
Yeah, queer. Yeah, lots of examples.
Yeah. Where's the blessed poor? That's a really good point. Yeah. But again, we're dealing with the category reimagined. And the question I think still be, can every category be reimagined of race? Do we have to just get rid of some of them and make others? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the question.
Thank you.
Great discussions, y'all.
Makes me wanna go back to school.
I know.
Come to Gustavus. We have fun over there.
I went to
Some of us are not.
Oh, nice. Okay, okay.